The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of Westmount Palace as Princess Isabella adjusted her pearl necklace one final time. Today marked the 10th anniversary of the Children's Health Foundation, an organization she had poured her heart into building from the ground up. The anticipation in her chest felt different this time, heavier somehow, as if the weight of recent palace tensions had settled into her bones. Isabella smoothed down her navy blue dress and checked her reflection in the ornate mirror near the palace entrance. At 34, she had learned to read the subtle signs of stress in her own face, the slight tightness around her green eyes, the way her usually perfect smile required more effort to maintain. The past few months had been particularly challenging, with Queen Regent Vivian making her displeasure about various royal duties increasingly clear. "Your Royal Highness, the car is ready," announced James, her longtime personal secretary, his tone gentle but professional. He had been with Isabella since her engagement to Prince Alexander 7 years ago, and she often wondered if he could sense the growing strain in the royal household as keenly as she could. Prince Alexander appeared at her side, adjusting his military dress uniform with practiced precision. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his blue eyes held that familiar warmth that had first captured her attention at a diplomatic dinner years ago. Even now, after all this time, the sight of him in formal attire made her heart skip slightly. "Ready for today?" he asked, placing a supportive hand on the small of her back. The gesture was automatic, something he had done thousands of times, but Isabella found herself grateful for the physical reminder of his presence. "As ready as I can be," Isabella replied, managing a genuine smile for the first time that morning. "The children are going to love the new playground equipment. We managed to raise enough funds for 3 hospitals this year." Alexander's pride in his wife was evident in his expression. "You've worked incredibly hard for this, Bella. The foundation is your greatest achievement." They walked together toward the waiting royal car, their footsteps echoing softly in the grand hallway. Isabella had always loved this particular corridor, with its portraits of previous monarchs and the way morning light streamed through the tall windows. Today, however, the familiar surroundings felt slightly oppressive, as if the weight of tradition and expectation was pressing down more heavily than usual. Queen Regent Vivian emerged from the blue drawing room, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her burgundy suit immaculate despite the early hour. At 62, she carried herself with the regal bearing that came from decades of royal protocol. Her marriage to the late King Frederick had elevated her from a duchess to the most powerful woman in the kingdom, and she wielded that power with careful precision. "Alexander, Isabella," she acknowledged with a nod that was polite but notably cool. "I trust today's event will proceed without any complications." The pause before the word complications was deliberate, and Isabella felt her stomach tighten slightly. Vivian had a talent for making seemingly innocent statements carry multiple layers of meaning, and Isabella had learned to recognize the warning signs. "Of course, Your Majesty," Isabella responded, maintaining her diplomatic tone. "Everything has been carefully planned. The medical staff will be available to speak with the media about the impact of the new equipment, and we have several families ready to share their stories." "Excellent," Vivian replied, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I do hope the focus remains appropriately on the charitable work rather than personal matters." Alexander stepped slightly closer to his wife, a protective gesture that was subtle but unmistakable. "Mother, Isabella has managed this foundation flawlessly for years. I'm sure today will be no different." "Naturally," Vivian said, her tone suggesting the conversation was concluded. "I shall see you both at the event." As they settled into the royal car, Isabella found herself replaying the brief exchange. Vivian's comments had become increasingly pointed lately, though always delivered with plausible deniability. It was a masterful form of communication that left Isabella feeling criticized without being able to pinpoint exactly what she had done wrong. "Don't let her get to you," Alexander said quietly, reading her expression with the accuracy that came from years of marriage. "You know how she gets before public events. She's just nervous about everything going smoothly." Isabella nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Vivian's behavior had shifted notably in recent months, becoming more controlling and critical. It felt less like pre-event nerves and more like a systematic campaign to undermine her confidence. The drive to St. Margaret's Children's Hospital took them through the heart of the capital city. Isabella watched the familiar streets pass by, the historic buildings, the modern shopping districts, the parks where families gathered on weekend mornings. This was her kingdom too now, and she had grown to love it deeply over the years. The responsibility of serving its people had become the driving force behind most of her decisions. Tell me about the families we're meeting today, Alexander said, clearly attempting to redirect her thoughts toward more positive territory. Isabella's expression brightened as she pulled out her briefing folder. There's little Emma Martinez, who's 7 and has been through 3 heart surgeries. She's incredibly brave, and her mother says she's been asking about meeting us for weeks. Then, there's the Thompson family. Their son Daniel was born with a rare condition that required specialized equipment we helped fund last year. As she spoke about the families, Isabella's genuine passion became evident. This work wasn't just a royal duty for her, it was a calling that gave deeper meaning to her position. She had studied child development before her marriage and had always intended to use her platform to make a difference in young lives. And the media interest? Alexander asked, though he already knew the answer would be significant. Substantial, Isabella admitted. But I think that's good. The more attention we can draw to these issues, the more support we can generate. Children's healthcare shouldn't be a luxury available only to some families. The car pulled through the hospital gates, and Isabella could see the crowd of reporters and photographers already gathered near the main entrance. Her personal protection officers had arrived earlier to coordinate with hospital security, ensuring that the children and families would be shielded from any overwhelming media attention. Remember, Alexander said, taking her hand gently, this is your day. You've earned every bit of recognition you receive for this work. Isabella squeezed his hand gratefully, drawing strength from his unwavering support. In moments like these, she remembered why she had fallen in love with him, not just because he was charming and handsome, but because he truly believed in her ability to make a difference. As they approached the hospital entrance, Isabella could see hospital staff members lined up to greet them, along with several families holding small children. The sight of the children, some in wheelchairs, some with visible medical equipment, some simply small and vulnerable looking, reminded her powerfully of why this work mattered so much. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief pediatrician, stepped forward as they exited the car. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to St. Margaret's. We are so honored to have you here today. Dr. Chen, the honor is ours, Isabella replied warmly. I've been looking forward to seeing the new cardiac unit in person. The reports you've sent have been incredibly encouraging. As they began the formal tour, Isabella found herself relaxing for the first time all morning. This environment, surrounded by medical professionals dedicated to helping children, felt natural and comfortable to her. She asked detailed questions about the equipment, listened intently to case studies, and engaged genuinely with everyone they met. The new playground equipment was installed in a bright, cheerful courtyard designed specifically for young patients and their siblings. Colorful climbing structures, adaptive swings for children with mobility challenges, and sensory play areas had been carefully selected to provide therapeutic benefits while simply allowing kids to be kids. This is absolutely wonderful, Isabella said, watching as several children eagerly demonstrated the equipment. Their joy was infectious, and she found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in days as a 6-year-old named Marcus showed off his climbing skills. Alexander stood nearby, observing his wife in her element. These moments reminded him why he had been so drawn to her initially: her ability to connect authentically with people, her genuine care for others, and her natural grace under pressure. She wasn't performing for the cameras, this was simply who she was. The media contingent was substantial but well-managed, with reporters and photographers capturing both formal presentations and candid moments of interaction. Isabella had learned over the years how to balance accessibility with appropriate boundaries, ensuring that the families felt comfortable while still providing the media with meaningful content. As they prepared to enter the hospital for the more formal presentations, Isabella noticed Queen Regent Vivian's car pulling into the designated area. She felt her shoulders tense slightly, though she maintained her smile for the cameras and the families around them. Vivian emerged from her car with characteristic elegance, her burgundy outfit coordinated perfectly with a matching hat and handbag. Her smile was radiant for the photographers, and she moved with the confident grace that had made her a beloved public figure for decades. Your Majesty, Dr. Chen greeted Vivian with a respectful curtsy. We are delighted that you could join us for this celebration. I wouldn't miss such an important milestone, Vivian replied, her voice carrying clearly for the benefit of nearby microphones. The work being done here represents the very best of our kingdom's values. Isabella watched as Vivian seamlessly took control of the moment, positioning herself at the center of the group and engaging the families with practiced charm. It was a masterful display of royal presence, and Isabella found herself both admiring and feeling slightly overshadowed by her mother-in-law's natural command of the situation. As they moved inside for the formal ceremony, Isabella caught Alexander's eye and saw understanding there. He had noticed the subtle shift in dynamics as well, though his expression remained diplomatically neutral. This was going to be a longer day than either of them had anticipated, and Isabella steeled herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. The formal ceremony took place in the hospital's newly renovated conference room, where representatives from the Children's Health Foundation, hospital administrators, and select media members had gathered. Isabella had spent weeks preparing for this presentation, working closely with the foundation's team to ensure that every detail would properly honor the families they served and the medical professionals who made their work possible. Large photographs displaying before and after images of the various hospital improvements lined the walls, and Isabella felt a surge of pride as she looked at them. The cardiac unit renovation, the new diagnostic equipment, and the family comfort areas represented months of fundraising, planning, and coordination. More importantly, they represented real improvements in the lives of children and families facing medical challenges. Queen Regent Vivian took her seat in the front row, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the room. Isabella noticed how naturally the hospital staff and foundation representatives oriented themselves toward Vivian, despite the fact that this was technically Isabella's event. It was a reminder of the complex dynamics that governed royal hierarchy, where respect and deference followed established protocols regardless of who had done the actual work. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Chen began, stepping up to the podium, "we gather today to celebrate a remarkable milestone in pediatric healthcare. Through the extraordinary efforts of the Children's Health Foundation and the generous support of our royal family, St. Margaret's Hospital has been transformed into a truly world-class facility for young patients." Isabella listened as Dr. Chen detailed the specific improvements made possible by the foundation's fundraising efforts. The new cardiac catheterization suite had already been used to perform life-saving procedures on 12 children. The updated family support areas provided comfortable spaces for parents during long hospital stays. The therapeutic playground offered not just recreation but actual physical therapy benefits for young patients. When it came time for Isabella to speak, she approached the podium with carefully prepared remarks, though she had also planned to speak from the heart about why this work meant so much to her personally. She looked out at the audience, seeing familiar faces from the hospital staff, foundation board members, and several families who had benefited from the improvements. "When I first became involved with children's healthcare advocacy," Isabella began, "I thought I understood what it meant to make a difference in young lives. But these past years have taught me that the real teachers are the children themselves, and the families who face each day with incredible courage and hope." She spoke about specific cases, with permission from the families, describing how the new equipment and facilities had directly impacted treatment outcomes. Her voice was steady and confident, drawing from genuine emotion rather than prepared talking points. This was the kind of public speaking that came naturally to her when she could speak about something that truly mattered. "The Martinez family is here with us today," Isabella continued, gesturing toward Maria Martinez and her daughter Emma, who was sitting in the front row wearing a bright yellow dress and beaming with excitement. "Emma has undergone 3 heart surgeries in the past 2 years, and each time, the advanced equipment we've been able to provide has made her treatment safer and more effective." As Isabella spoke, she could see Alexander in the audience, his expression radiating pride and support. He had been her strongest advocate throughout the development of this foundation, encouraging her to take on leadership roles and supporting her vision even when others questioned whether she should be taking such an active approach to royal duties. However, she also noticed Vivian's expression, which seemed to have grown more neutral as the presentation continued. There was nothing overtly disapproving in her mother-in-law's demeanor, but Isabella had learned to read the subtle signs of Vivian's moods. The slight tightness around her eyes, the way she held her hands folded in her lap, these were indicators that Isabella had somehow fallen short of expectations. When Isabella concluded her remarks, the applause was warm and sustained. Several families approached her afterward to express their personal gratitude, and she found herself genuinely moved by their stories. These interactions always reminded her why she had chosen to focus her royal duties on children's causes rather than taking on more traditional ceremonial roles. As the formal program concluded, the group moved to tour the actual medical facilities that had been upgraded through the foundation's work. The new cardiac unit was particularly impressive, with state-of-the-art monitoring equipment and child-friendly design elements that helped reduce anxiety for young patients. "This is remarkable," said James Patterson, a prominent child health advocate who had traveled from London specifically for today's event. "The integration of advanced medical technology with age-appropriate design shows real thoughtfulness about the patient experience." Isabella was explaining the design process to Mr. Patterson when she noticed Vivian approaching with several hospital board members in tow. The Queen Regent's expression was pleasant, but Isabella sensed an undercurrent of something more complex in her demeanor. "Isabella, dear," Vivian said, her tone warm enough for public consumption, "I was just discussing with Dr. Robertson here the possibility of expanding this model to other hospitals in the kingdom. Perhaps we should coordinate such efforts through the traditional royal charitable channels." The suggestion was delivered smoothly, but Isabella immediately understood the implication. Vivian was suggesting that future expansion should be managed through established royal foundations rather than through Isabella's independent organization. It was a polite way of asserting control over what had been Isabella's autonomous project. "That's certainly something we could explore," Isabella replied carefully, maintaining her diplomatic tone while inwardly feeling frustrated. "The Children's Health Foundation has developed significant expertise in this area, so I'm sure we could contribute valuable insights to any broader initiative." "Of course," Vivian said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though we must be careful not to duplicate efforts or create unnecessary complexity in our charitable operations." Dr. Robertson, caught between two members of the royal family, looked somewhat uncomfortable as he tried to navigate the subtle tension. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss how best to proceed with expansion plans," he suggested diplomatically. As they continued the tour, Isabella found herself increasingly aware of the way Vivian was positioning herself within the group. The Queen Regent had a natural ability to draw attention and deference, and Isabella watched as conversations gradually began to orient around Vivian rather than around the Foundation's work. It wasn't that Vivian was being deliberately disruptive, quite the opposite. She was being perfectly charming, asking thoughtful questions, and expressing appropriate admiration for the improvements. But her very presence seemed to shift the focus away from Isabella's leadership and toward more traditional royal hierarchy. Alexander, walking beside his wife, noticed her growing tension. "You're doing wonderfully," he said quietly during a brief moment when they had stepped slightly apart from the main group. "Everyone here understands that this is your achievement." Isabella appreciated his support, but she was beginning to feel as though the day was slipping away from her original vision. The ceremony had gone well, but the underlying dynamics were more complicated than she had anticipated. She had hoped to use this milestone event to demonstrate the Foundation's independence and effectiveness, but instead found herself navigating careful political waters. The tour concluded in the children's play area, where several young patients and their siblings were enjoying the new equipment. This had been Isabella's favorite part of the planning process, working with child development specialists and therapeutic recreation experts to create a space that would genuinely benefit young patients. "Your Royal Highness," called out Emma Martinez, running up to Isabella with the fearless enthusiasm that only 7-year-olds possess. "Thank you for the new swings. The ones that go side to side are my favorite because they don't make me dizzy like the regular ones." Isabella knelt down to Emma's level, genuinely delighted to hear her feedback. "I'm so glad you like them, Emma. We wanted to make sure there were options for every child, regardless of their medical needs." As Isabella chatted with Emma and several other children, she felt some of her earlier tension begin to ease. This interaction, unmediated by protocol or political considerations, reminded her of why she had become so passionate about this work in the first place. The direct impact on individual children's lives made all the administrative challenges worthwhile. However, she was also aware that Vivian was observing these interactions with careful attention. The Queen Regent's expression was pleasant, but Isabella sensed that she was being evaluated in some way, as if her natural rapport with the children was being measured against some unspoken standard. When it came time for the final photo opportunities, the hospital's public relations team had arranged for pictures with families, medical staff, and the new equipment. Isabella had expected to be the central figure in these photographs, given her role in creating and leading the foundation. Instead, she found herself watching as Vivian naturally moved into the center of most group arrangements. Hospital staff and family members seemed to automatically defer to the Queen Regent's position, and the photographers adjusted their setups accordingly. Isabella remained prominent in the photos, but clearly as a supporting figure rather than the primary focus. "Your Majesty," said the lead photographer, addressing Vivian, "could we have you standing here beside the new cardiac monitor, with Princess Isabella on your left?" Isabella took her designated position, maintaining her smile while inwardly feeling frustrated by the subtle shift in dynamics. She understood royal protocol and had never expected to overshadow Vivian's position, but she had hoped to be recognized as the driving force behind this particular achievement. Alexander seemed to sense her discomfort and moved closer, placing a supportive hand on her back as the cameras clicked. His presence was reassuring, though it didn't entirely dispel her growing sense that the day was not unfolding as she had envisioned. As the formal photography session concluded, Dr. Chen approached with the final presentation, a beautifully bound album documenting the hospital's transformation through the foundation's support. Isabella had been looking forward to this moment, as the album represented a tangible record of the foundation's impact. "Your Majesty, Dr. Chen said, presenting the album to Vivian, "We wanted to offer this to the royal family as a token of our profound gratitude for making these improvements possible." Isabella felt a sharp pang of disappointment as she watched Vivian accept the album with gracious dignity. While it was technically appropriate for the senior royal to receive such honors, it felt like a symbolic erasure of Isabella's personal investment in the project. "How thoughtful," Vivian said, accepting the album with evident pleasure. "I know this will be treasured as a record of the wonderful work being done here." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Isabella found herself reflecting on the complex emotions the day had generated. The foundation's work had been successful, the children and families had been genuinely helped, and the public attention would likely generate additional support for pediatric healthcare. These were all positive outcomes that aligned with her original goals. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been diminished in the process. Her role as an independent leader had been subtly but systematically overshadowed, and she was left wondering whether this was simply the natural order of royal hierarchy or something more deliberate. The evening reception at Westmount Palace was intended to celebrate the foundation's milestone and thank major donors and supporters. Isabella had spent considerable time planning every detail, from the menu featuring locally sourced ingredients to the musical selections that would create an elegant but welcoming atmosphere. The guest list included prominent pediatric specialists, foundation board members, major donors, and several of the families whose children had benefited from the hospital improvements. Isabella changed into a floor-length emerald green gown that Alexander had given her for their 5th wedding anniversary. The dress brought out the color of her eyes and made her feel confident and regal, qualities she knew she would need for the evening ahead. As her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, helped with final touches to her hair and jewelry, Isabella tried to push aside her lingering concerns from the afternoon's events. "You look absolutely radiant, Your Royal Highness," Margaret said, stepping back to admire the final result. Margaret had been with Isabella since shortly after her engagement and had developed an intuitive understanding of her employer's moods and needs. "Thank you, Margaret," Isabella replied, though her smile felt somewhat forced. "I suppose I'm just feeling the weight of such an important evening." Margaret's expression showed gentle concern. "Is everything all right, ma'am? You seem more tense than usual for these events." Isabella hesitated, then decided to confide partially in someone she trusted. "I'm just finding the dynamics with Queen Regent Vivian more challenging lately. I can't quite put my finger on what's changed, but something feels different. Perhaps she's feeling the pressure of increased public attention on the younger generation of royals," Margaret suggested diplomatically. "Change can be difficult, even when it's positive." As Isabella made her way downstairs to the state dining room, she could hear the gentle hum of conversation and classical music that indicated the reception was already underway. She paused at the top of the grand staircase, taking a moment to center herself before joining the gathering. These events required her to be on for several hours straight, engaging meaningfully with diverse groups of people while representing both her personal values and the institution of the monarchy. The state dining room had been transformed for the evening, with round tables arranged to encourage intimate conversations among guests. Fresh flower arrangements in soft pastels decorated each table, and the palace's finest crystal and china created an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Isabella was pleased to see that families were comfortably mingling with prominent donors and medical professionals, exactly the kind of cross-pollination of perspectives she had hoped to achieve. Alexander appeared at her side as she entered the room, offering his arm with a warm smile. "You've outdone yourself with the arrangements," he said quietly. "Dr. Chen was just telling me how impressed she is with the thoughtfulness of bringing together such diverse voices in pediatric advocacy." "That means a great deal," Isabella replied, feeling some of her earlier confidence returning. "I really wanted this to be more than just another fundraising dinner. These conversations between families and medical professionals and donors, that's where real innovation happens." As they moved through the room, Isabella found herself energized by the genuine enthusiasm of the guests. Maria Martinez was deep in conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen about the emotional support needs of families facing long-term pediatric treatment. Several prominent donors were asking detailed questions about specific medical equipment and its impact on patient outcomes. The evening felt purposeful and meaningful in exactly the way Isabella had envisioned. Princess Isabella, called James Patterson, the child health advocate from London, approaching with obvious enthusiasm. I've been speaking with several of the medical team members, and I'm absolutely convinced that this model should be replicated across the kingdom. The integration of family-centered design with cutting-edge medical technology is genuinely revolutionary. Isabella felt a surge of pride at his words. That's wonderful to hear, Mr. Patterson. We've tried very hard to ensure that every improvement serves both medical necessity and human dignity. Have you given thought to documenting your approach for other institutions? Patterson continued. I believe there would be significant international interest in your methodologies. Before Isabella could respond, she noticed Queen Regent Vivian approaching their conversation cluster. The Queen Regent looked stunning in a deep blue gown with sapphire jewelry, and her presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the immediate area. Mr. Patterson, Vivian said warmly, extending her hand in greeting. How delightful to see you here this evening. I understand you've been examining our recent healthcare initiatives. Your Majesty, Patterson replied with a respectful bow. I was just expressing to Princess Isabella my admiration for the innovative approach she's developed here. This could serve as a model for pediatric facilities internationally. How gratifying, Vivian said, her smile bright and diplomatic. Of course, these efforts build upon decades of royal charitable work. The monarchy has always been committed to advancing healthcare for our youngest citizens. Isabella felt a familiar flutter of uncertainty as Vivian smoothly redirected the conversation toward broader royal traditions rather than the specific innovations of the Children's Health Foundation. It was subtle, but it had the effect of contextualizing Isabella's work as part of a larger institutional legacy rather than as independent leadership. Indeed, Patterson said, though Isabella detected a slight note of confusion in his voice. Though I must say, the specific approach Princess Isabella has taken, the direct involvement with medical planning, the family-centered design process, the focus on both therapeutic and emotional needs, that strikes me as quite distinctive. Naturally, Vivian agreed pleasantly. Isabella has always been very hands-on in her approach to charitable work. The way Vivian said hands-on carried a subtle undertone that Isabella couldn't quite decipher. It sounded like praise, but there was something in the inflection that suggested it might not be entirely positive. Isabella found herself second-guessing her own interpretation, wondering if she was being oversensitive to implications that might not actually be there. As the conversation continued, Isabella noticed Alexander observing the exchange with growing attention. His expression remained diplomatically neutral, but she could see the slight tension around his eyes that suggested he was picking up on the same subtle undercurrents that were making her uncomfortable. If you'll excuse me, Isabella said, deciding to gracefully extract herself from the increasingly complex conversation, I should check on our other guests. As she moved away, she heard Vivian continuing to speak with Patterson about the wonderful tradition of royal philanthropy and the importance of maintaining institutional continuity in charitable efforts. The words were perfectly appropriate, but they had the effect of diminishing the innovative aspects of Isabella's work in favor of emphasizing traditional royal approaches. Isabella found herself gravitating toward a table where several families were seated with medical staff members. This felt like safer territory, conversations focused on practical outcomes rather than institutional politics. She particularly enjoyed speaking with David Thompson, whose son Daniel had been one of the first patients to benefit from the new diagnostic equipment. Princess Isabella, David said, standing as she approached, Sarah and I have been telling Dr. Martinez here about how much the new family support areas meant to us during Daniel's treatment. Having a comfortable place to stay close to him made such a difference. I'm so glad to hear that, Isabella replied, genuinely pleased by the feedback. Those areas were actually designed based on input from families like yours. We wanted to make sure they met real needs rather than just looking impressive. As she listened to the families share their experiences, Isabella felt her confidence returning. This was the impact she had been working toward, real improvements in the lives of children and families facing medical challenges. The political complexities of royal hierarchy seemed less important when measured against these concrete benefits. However, she couldn't help but notice that Vivian had positioned herself at the center of the room's largest conversation cluster, where she was holding court with several prominent donors and medical administrators. The Queen Regent's natural charisma and decades of experience in royal entertaining made her a magnetic presence, and Isabella watched as conversations throughout the room began to orient toward Vivian's location. Dr. Chen approached Isabella with a warm smile, though her expression held a note of diplomatic uncertainty. Your Royal Highness, I've been speaking with Queen Regent Vivian about the possibility of expanding this model to other hospitals. She mentioned that future initiatives might be coordinated through existing royal charitable structures. I wanted to ensure that the Children's Health Foundation would remain involved in any such expansion. Isabella felt her heart sink slightly as she realized that Vivian had been actively working the room to discuss future plans without including her in those conversations. Certainly, Dr. Chen. The Foundation has developed considerable expertise in this area, and we would be eager to contribute to any broader initiatives. Wonderful, Dr. Chen said, though her expression suggested she was navigating between competing royal interests. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss coordination between the various charitable entities involved. As the evening progressed, Isabella found herself increasingly aware of being managed and contained rather than celebrated as a leader. Vivian's approach was masterful in its subtlety. She never directly contradicted or criticized Isabella, but consistently repositioned conversations to emphasize institutional continuity and traditional royal approaches over innovative individual leadership. During the formal toasts, Isabella had prepared remarks focusing on the collaborative nature of the Foundation's work and the inspiring dedication of the medical professionals and families involved. However, when the moment came for speeches, Vivian stepped forward first, graciously taking the podium with the natural authority of her position. My dear friends, Vivian began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the room, we gather tonight to celebrate not just a milestone, but a continuation of the monarchy's enduring commitment to the welfare of our youngest citizens. This commitment spans generations and represents the very best of our institutional values. Isabella listened as Vivian delivered a beautifully crafted speech that acknowledged the Foundation's work while firmly placing it within the context of broader royal tradition. The words were generous toward Isabella's efforts, but the overall effect was to diminish the sense of independent innovation and leadership that Isabella had hoped to convey. When it came time for Isabella to speak, she found herself in the position of following rather than leading, responding to themes Vivian had already established rather than setting her own agenda for the evening. Her prepared remarks suddenly felt inadequate, too focused on specific innovations and individual leadership when the conversation had already been framed around institutional continuity. Thank you, Your Majesty, Isabella began, adjusting her approach to fit the context Vivian had created. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to contribute to such an important tradition of royal service. The children and families we serve remind us daily why this work matters so profoundly. As she spoke, Isabella noticed Alexander watching her with an expression of growing concern. He seemed to recognize that she was having to modify her planned remarks to fit within the framework Vivian had established, and his displeasure with the situation was becoming increasingly evident despite his diplomatic training. The evening concluded with what appeared to be a highly successful celebration, with guests expressing enthusiasm for the Foundation's work and generous pledges of continued support. However, Isabella felt emotionally drained rather than energized by the positive response. The constant navigation of subtle political undercurrents had taken a toll that she hadn't fully anticipated. As the last guests departed, Isabella found herself standing in the now quiet state dining room, looking at the remnants of what had been a beautiful evening. Alexander approached and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That was more challenging than it should have been, he said quietly, acknowledging what they had both observed throughout the evening. Isabella nodded, feeling a mix of frustration, sadness, and confusion about the events of both the afternoon and evening. I'm not sure what I did wrong, Alex. I thought I was being appropriately deferential while still taking credit for the work the Foundation has done. You didn't do anything wrong, Alexander replied firmly. The problem isn't with your approach. The following morning brought an unexpected summons to Queen Regent Vivian's private study, a room Isabella had visited only a handful of times during her 7 years in the royal family. The study was an intimidating space, with dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and formal portraits of previous monarchs looking down with serious expressions. Isabella found herself checking her appearance one final time before Margaret announced her arrival. Your Majesty, Isabella said, offering a respectful curtsy as she entered the room. Vivian was seated behind an imposing mahogany desk, wearing a crisp navy blue suit that emphasized her authoritative bearing. Several folders were arranged neatly on the desk surface, suggesting this was to be a formal discussion rather than a casual conversation. Isabella, thank you for coming, Vivian said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs positioned in front of her desk. Please, sit down. I thought it would be beneficial for us to have a private discussion about recent events and future directions. Isabella settled into the indicated chair, trying to read Vivian's expression for clues about the tone this conversation would take. The Queen Regent's face was pleasant but neutral, giving away nothing about her intentions or mood. I wanted to begin by saying how impressed I was with yesterday's events, Vivian continued, her tone warm but somehow formal. The hospital improvements are genuinely remarkable, and the family's clearly benefited enormously from your foundation's efforts. Thank you, Your Majesty, Isabella replied, though she sensed there was more coming. It means a great deal to receive your support. Of course, Vivian said, leaning back slightly in her chair. However, I think yesterday also highlighted some areas where we might need to refine our approach to royal charitable work. There are certain protocols and considerations that become more important as public attention increases. Isabella felt her stomach tighten.